Hi, hello, and welcome to the Unlearning series from iShield.ai. This series is dedicated to all of us to help us unlearn our biases to be more inclusive. And we invite global leaders to talk about specific topics in the area of unconscious bias, inclusion, and how technology can help. Uh, iShield.ai is a technology company helping companies create bias-free communications. And today we have Anima Nair joining us. And Anima is going to talk about neurodiversity. And Anima is currently the lead of content strategy at NeuroGifted. She is also a neurodiversity consultant and speaker based out of Bangalore in India, an executive council member of the Association for Neurodiversity and member of WICCI Karnataka Special Needs Chapter. She also designs awareness programs for schools and companies. Her passion for working with teenagers has led her to being an advisor for Speed Club, India's first emotional gym. She is the former co-founder and director of Sense Kaleidoscopes, an academic and vocational center for youngsters on the autism spectrum. Her years of working with autistic individuals and raising an autistic son has given her a unique insight into, as well as deep empathy for neurodivergents and their needs. Let's get ready to learn. Please help me welcome Anima. Anima, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hi. Um, I would like to start off with getting some clarity on the terminology around neurodiversity. I mean, I've heard phrases of neurodiversity, neurotypical, neurodivergent, neurotype. It would be good if you could kind of help us started in terms of what's the right terminology, and what does it mean before we get more deeper into the subject.
Yeah, sure, Keshwan. Thank you for that question because that is where all questions I think should start when it comes to neurodiversity. We have, like you said, there's not enough awareness and knowledge about neurodiversity going on, especially in certain regions of the world. So we start clarifying, immediately. So neurodiversity is simply the idea that human brains are varying and diverse in their abilities and in the way that they function. So it's an umbrella term. It's a very inclusive term. And when you say neurodivergent, when you say neurodivergent individuals, that means those individuals have brains that receive, perceive, process, store, and transmit information differently than what is considered to be normal. So the normal is, defined as how the majority of human brains work. It's also called typical. So neurodivergent is the opposite of being typical. The typical brains are called neurotypicals. So people with typical brains are called neurotypicals. So that's how you've got your neurodiversity. You've got neurodivergent. You've got neurotypicals. So if you have any more terminology that we can discuss, I'm happy to help there as well.
I also want to state that this is a subject that I'm learning, and throughout this conversation, if I use wrong phrases or wrong terminology, so I apologize, and please do highlight so I can also become better in using the right phrases. So
Absolutely.
uh, getting into the unconscious bias. So, what really is the issue here in terms of the unconscious bias towards neurodivergence? How does this kind of start? How does this kind of manifest? If you could provide an overview, that will be great.
Sure. So, what I missed saying earlier is that when we say neurodivergence and when you're talking about neurodiversity, it encompasses several conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, hyperlexia, Tourette's, so many conditions. Therefore, when we consider a neurodivergent individual, we cannot actually generalize and say that these will be the strengths and these will be the challenges. Every neurodivergent individual is different. So that's one thing that I wanted to establish before going on to talk about unconscious bias. So we all know that, based on our lived experiences, based on the environment around us, we have developed biases during our lifetime, and they're mostly implicit. We are not even aware that we have them. When it comes to neurodivergence in the workplace, because of these conditions that I've been mentioning, the way that their behaviors manifest, the way that their thinking processes manifest will be different. And therefore, there is naturally going to be a bias against them. That's the baseline. Anyone who's different is going to be viewed with a certain amount of bias, and there you have that little bit of negativity coming in. In the case of neurodivergence, it's much higher. It's more prevalent because the lack of understanding about neurodivergence, that makes the bias even, the bias is at a higher degree than you would normally expect. So unconscious bias against neurodivergence is a huge topic by itself. Every interaction that a neurotypical and a neurodivergent has will have some level of bias in it. So at the end of it, when you talk about how it manifests in an ableist way of speaking, and in actions that show that we the neurotypicals think that neurodivergents are in some way not as capable as we are. That is what shows up in your interactions in the workplace, and that is what needs to be tackled. That's just one example, but that
Yeah.
pervades through all the interactions. There's also gaslighting, microaggressions, bullying. All of that actually manifests out of this bias.
Yeah, yeah. We will cover those topics in a little bit more depth as we go along. I was reading an article which said that the unemployment rate, particularly for people who are neurodivergent, is almost 85%. And I was also talking to a few companies who work with people in the autism spectrum, and they were saying that the single most important thing that people care about is employment. They want a way to make a living. So while there is this huge huge need to make a living, at the same time the opportunities and their employment rates are very low. So I think that's probably is prevalent, and also it must be costing the companies significantly. So do you can you throw some light on that in terms of what is the cost? Of course, the cost to the person is very significant, but I also want to get a sense of what must it be costing companies?
Well, we all know, I mean, it's been proven, there's so many studies, and even when you interact with neurodivergence, you know that you're dealing with an untapped talent pool over here. Okay, it's really underutilized. You were saying 85%. I would put that number closer to 70%, because 70% can be, of neurodivergence are either unemployed or underemployed. And this
Okay.
is despite being skilled, despite having the qualifications, despite battling their way through systems, education systems, and so on. Right? So, how is this costing companies? There are different ways of assessing that. One would be, what is the direct cost? Companies lose out on innovation, on creativity, on higher productivity levels, on being able to retain more members of their workforce. So that's a direct cost. Indirect costs would be like losing out on factors like resilience and adaptability, because a neurodiverse team, and a neurodiverse team means neurotypicals and neurodivergents, everyone together. Neurodiverse team does not mean only neurodivergence. So a neurodiverse team is far more productive and resilient than your regular neurotypical team. It has been proven. There's been lots of studies, lots of statistics around it. So when you talk about direct and indirect costs, this is how I would have this is how I would like to talk about it, saying that you would lose out on innovation and you lose out on resilience, adaptability, and so on. Now, if you want statistics, just to show you the kind of productivity that we're talking about here, that companies could be losing out on just because of all of the factors, all of the barriers to inclusion that are happening at the moment. So JP Morgan found that autistic workers took just 3 to 6 months to do the same level of work in their mortgage banking technology department versus maybe 3 years for neurotypicals to do the same kind of work. And JP Morgan Chase reports that professionals in its Autism at Work initiative, they've had fewer errors. They're 90 to 140% more productive. So you have these kind of statistics that are absolutely mind blowing. And for another example, Ernst and Young has a fairly large program. So Ernst and Young, US and Canada, in their case, they had 12 centers, they had more than 200 plus neurodivergent employees, and they have published figures saying that they saved 2.6 million hours of Ernst and Y productivity time and more than $650 million in quantitative ROI. So here are your numbers, here are your facts and statistics about what companies are actually losing out by not being neuro-inclusive, by not embracing neurodiversity.
Yeah. I also read that almost 20% of the world population you could categorize as neurodivergent, which also means that we have a significant talent pool who companies can tap into and they are not. So that's also an opportunity lost,
Absolutely.
according to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So you spoke about barriers in workplace to inclusion. I would love you love to get learn a little bit more about what are these barriers. How what kind of barriers do that exist in a workplace for neurodivergence.
Um, So there are a whole host of barriers. The first thing is, of course, a lack of awareness of neurodiversity. So the lack of awareness itself leads to all of the subsequent barriers that you can, anything that you can think about, neurodivergence, feeling unwanted, excluded. Um, all of this, serves as a barrier in the sense that there are no inclusive work relationships happening. The neurodivergents are usually called, like for instance, ADHDers are called distracted, lazy, maybe underperforming. Again, the barriers, when, if you want to enumerate the barriers, there are just so many. If you ask a neurodivergent individual, and I work with them, they'll say that all of these barriers are in your face, they're there all the time. If you ask us to pick out one barrier, we can't tell you. It's sort of systemic because of the discrimination that's against neurodivergence. Unless we fix the culture, these barriers will continue to exist. And it's not just, let's say, if I give you the example of hiring, it's not just the barriers that come when, let's say, an interviewer is hiring someone and that someone happens to be neurodivergent. The interviewer is still expecting that person to follow neurotypical traits like making eye contact or like being charming, making small talk, giving that relaxed body language. Neurodivergents mostly cannot do that. They cannot do well in face-to-face interviews. There's your first barrier. They looking at job descriptions, there's another barrier because none of the things that we're talking about right now, Keshavan, none of them are geared, nothing is designed to, nothing is even created with the thought of neurodivergence in mind. So for a neurodivergent individual to traverse this entire process, be the employment process in its, entirety, from hiring and interviewing and onboarding and continuing support, all of those things, everything is challenging, every part of it is challenging. So if you asked me to explain the barriers, I'm trying to think of places where there aren't barriers because it's literally all over the place. And without
Yeah.
fixing the culture, we can't really move on to how we can address these barriers.
Yeah, I also read that what happens because of these barriers and the hardship in navigating these barriers is um, neurodivergents end up masking um, or they pass off or try to pass off as neurotypical, or camouflage. All this just sounds very stressful. So and and then there is the other angle, which is, let us say, the neurotypical who is expected to interact and collaborate and work with neurodivergents. They have no training or a recognition of how to. I mean, I think they are also under stress. At least that's what at least some of the research that I have studied, because they, even the neurotypicals, don't have any awareness or a toolkit. um, uh, uh, so most of the times, even if you walked into an interview and somebody discloses, you're actually walking in and then you are expected to react. You really are not even prepared, is what I have read about most of the cases of how where the barrier starts.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
Sorry, you were saying something.
no, I was just trying to say that we can talk about neurodivergence, just using terminology like that. But in order to sensitize people to this problem that we're discussing, it would be good if, like, our listeners, our viewers, whoever, would visualize just one individual and just imagine that, for instance, let's take an autistic individual. There's a very high chance, more than 50-60%, that they have sensory processing difficulties, right? So sensorially, they're going to be overwhelmed. Lights, sounds, or overwhelmed or underwhelmed, it could be either way. So lights, sound, touch, sense, all of this affect somebody who has sensory processing difficulties and is autistic. So imagine you're going through the world is chaotic for this person, everything is geared to make them feel uncomfortable, and nothing provides calm in this chaos except a few learned behaviors that they have built on by themselves just so that they can cope with the environment. For instance, I would be like, I could be rocking like this, right? So this is a way for me to calm myself because there's a noise that's bothering me or there's light that's bothering me, something like that. So if you think of a neurodivergent person, in this case, an autistic individual, going through life trying to cope in an environment which is patently not designed for him or her, then imagine the kind of stress level that individual already lives with. Now put this individual in a workplace situation where everybody is, talking at high speed, expecting you to respond like this, and then talking about excellent communication skills, wonderful, teamwork. Can you do this fast? And if you are even this late in answering a question, the bias kicks in against you. Look at that. He's slow. He's not able to do this. What is this? Why are we even hiring this person? If you try to visualize such a scenario, you'll understand the kind of stress that person is under. And then you talk about neurotypical stress, which is not comparable. I'm sorry. It is not even in the same planet as all
Yeah,
of that.
I think
So,
the neurotypical stress is more to do with education and willingness
yes,
rather than actual
absolutely.
stress. I mean,
Yes.
um, um, but the let's digging deeper into the unconscious bias, and this unconscious bias is probably propagated or originates with neurotypicals, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and one form of that could be because of pop culture, where also, right, where I was watching this Korean drama Extraordinary Attorney Woo, for
Yes,
example.
yes. Yeah.
The pop culture kind of also uh, portrays people who are, let's say, on the autism spectrum as extraordinary, math nerd, great memory. But it sounds like that also is a very small subset and a stereotype. But
Yes.
I would like to know more in terms of unconscious biases that exist, what's the nature of them, the different variations, stereotypes. If you could touch on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so I mean, to talk about the character you just mentioned in the Korean serial, so yeah, she has a photographic memory and all of that stuff. Now, like you rightly pointed out, this popular media has sort of influenced our thinking. It influences it very strongly, especially when it's not backed up by real knowledge or real efforts to learn facts. So, yes, stereotypes are more harmful than good, given. And how do you sort of crack this huge nut of unconscious bias? And it can only happen if all of us go back to the basic idea of being human. Okay. Somewhere along the way, in our relentless journey to do whatever it is that we're doing in this world, we have lost our humanity to a great extent. Right now, you can hear of people having empathy coaches. Can you believe somebody having an empathy coach? I mean, think about it. Isn't empathy supposed to come naturally from a human being? So, where we have lost our humanity, we have lost our ability to be understanding of differences as well. So this is, for me, the root cause of the unconscious bias that you see right now. How do we tackle it? We have to do, again, like you said, awareness. We have to have very, very strong awareness programs. If we realize that we're doing something that is not quite right, if we introspect, then we will be sensitized to the fact that we need to do this in another way. But it all starts with great training. That's the only way we can change this entire narrative. Otherwise, removing unconscious bias from a person, it's not like extracting a tooth. The person has to be first convinced about the fact that they are carrying a bias. And how do they do that? Like, by exposure, by talking to more people who are in, who are neurodivergent or allies of neurodivergence, by reading up more about this, by just taking the effort to know why neurodiversity is something that enriches a company or enriches society rather than, being burdensome. So all of this starts with good training. That's the point that I would really want to emphasize on over here. And with training, and training has to, and training is not just about, telling the neurodivergents what to do or trying to shape neurodivergents to be like neurotypicals. Training is mostly about enabling your workplace, about preparing the soil, so to speak, so that when neurodiversity happens, when it's encouraged, when it is, solicited, then it'll be a successful initiative.
Yeah. I would like to take a question. The question will come up on the screen. Somebody on LinkedIn asked, Anima, have there been any challenges in responses to neurodivergent people in the global south? I think this is geographical differences. Have you come across how, or do you have any inputs or insights to offer here from the work that you have done, let's say in India, for example? How would that be different from in the West?
Yes. So, um, well, thank you for the question. I have not had experience working with the West when it comes to neurodiversity. My field of operations has been in India. And from what I know, and from my interactions with other colleagues elsewhere in the world, neurodiversity presents itself very differently in India. I'm just going to give the Indian example, simply because there is a greater degree of stigma, for instance, associated with it. And with the kind of population that we're talking about, look at the population of India. It's 1.3 billion or so, Keshavan, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and imagine 20% of that statistically having neurodivergence. So, look at the number of people that we're dealing with over here. And look at all the different problems that we have in India that go along with neurodivergence. We have poverty, we have lack of education, we have, systemic indifference mostly from the government. So, we have a lot of problems that we're dealing with, which makes neurodiversity appear differently in India, but at the same time, there are many commonalities. So, for me, in this working in this field, the greatest challenge has been the lack of awareness about neurodiversity and the fact that neurodivergent individuals are simply not given the opportunities, whether it's education, whether it's in the workplace. And all of this is due to a lot of ignorance and stigma and bias and the whole ball game. And that's what we have to tackle only with education, awareness building, training. That would be our best bet to tackle it. So that's where my sphere of work has been. So I can answer only with regards to that.
Thank you. Uh, I want to, talking about unconscious bias, I want to touch upon one aspect in the language people use that goes against neurodivergence or propagates these biases. It would be great if you could talk a little bit about what kind of language people use, and how does that kind of manifest these biases.
Um, so we all know language is very, it's really a huge part of how we function as human beings. And it's also important to remember that for neurodivergence, communication is a challenge for many of them. I'm not saying for all. Nothing about neurodivergence can be generalized in any case. But a lot of neurodivergent individuals have difficulty with communication. So when you put them in a workplace, if there is ambiguous communication, it's going to cause problems. If statements are not direct, they're not clear, if there are open-ended instructions, for instance, all of this causes problems. So that is an example of where communications can go wrong. When it comes to language, like you asked, there is a lot of ableist language, a lot of a language that is disrespectful towards neurodivergence, that's going on, spreading so casually that we aren't even aware that these words are derogatory, or that they are painful for neurodivergent individuals to have to listen to time and again. Even use like, what popular words are, like, using words like dumb or crazy, or hey, that's insane, it's stupid, it's lame, things like that. Or even the more offensive ones like retarded, or making statements saying, oh, that's just my OCD. It trivializes the what the neurodivergent experience, and it also, it completely disrespects who they are as individuals, because we're just not careful about the language we use. We think this is okay. Again, I think I would put a bit of this on unpopular media, because these words are so normal in our everyday functioning that it doesn't occur to us that these are absolutely a big no-no when it comes to using this kind of language against neurodivergence. Even terminology like high functioning autistic or low functioning, things like that, that's also something that we should completely remove from our vocabulary, because none of this is helpful if what your intention is to be neuro inclusive. This in fact will push neurodivergence away further than ever. And these words are used way too freely now in the workplace, in society, in schools. And that's another objective that we should all be aiming for, to remove such kind of words from the common vocabulary. Absolutely.
Yeah. Some other ways these unconscious biases manifest is, for example, derogatory comments or tone of voice. Or you also said that being charming and answering very quickly, and if you don't, and you take time, or then just speaking on behalf of them.
Yeah.
Um, uh, do you have some any examples, or again words or phrases that people use which kind of propagates these, right?
Yeah.
And these are very subtle. Most of the times it feels very subtle, but they are very discriminating.
Impactful. Yes. So,
Very, yeah,
so I'll give you an example. I'm not going to say the name of the company or anything over there, okay? But this example, I think people should hear about it. So there is a company that has it's hired a few neurodivergents in its attempt to start an initiative like the ones that we're talking about, a neurodiversity initiative. So there is a team, and a few members, like 4 or 5 members, whatever, and they're all neurodivergents. And they have a manager, a line manager, and of course they interact with their colleagues and so on. So one day this line manager comes across and says, um, ask somebody else, not these individuals, ask neurotypical colleagues or whatever, okay, where is the crazy team? Because that's how he referred to the team of neurodivergent individuals, the crazy team. And so these guys, the neurotypicals, and this is very typical of neurotypicals, let's put it that way, they call them the C team. So now our neurodivergents were under the impression that, oh yeah, there is an A team at work, there's a B team, so we're the C team. We're also part of this, right? So they felt like they belonged to the company because they thought C team was just part of being a team, like A team or B team. And only later, when they realized that C referred to crazy, that things started, going really badly out there because they were so offended, they were so hurt. And this is done not by their colleague, but by a manager. So you can understand why I'm saying training is so important. At every level, people have to be sensitized to the consequences of doing things like this, of just maybe thinking, maybe it started as a joke, but it didn't remain a joke for very long.
Yeah. Typically, the first reaction is, "Oh, I didn't mean it," or "It's a joke." But then it doesn't remain as a joke. Now, the other point that you also mentioned earlier was, I think you also cannot just build a culture that includes, let's say, neurodivergence. I think that you build an inclusive culture for everyone,
Yes.
and then otherwise, it will be a leaking tap. So the other aspect that I also came across was how neurodivergents internalize exclusion, right? And then there are all other issues around how it get triggered, that leads to anxiety. So I would like you to talk a little bit about how this workplace bullying or whatever that is leads to this kind of internalizing these exclusions, and then leads to a lot of other issues of underperformance, whatever. I also read a stat that yeah, a lot of people, or a significantly higher percentage of people, also think about suicide and things like that. So I'm just trying to touch about the impact it has on people. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is a very, very serious matter that you raised, because remember when I was telling you, visualize an autistic traversing this world, everything is against them. It's already difficult. It's more difficult than you can ever imagine. Then add on neurotypical shaped processes that they have to fit in, and everything blows out of proportion. So keeping that in mind, you can begin to understand that everyday things are stressful. Everyday things can cause anxiety. For an ADHDer, since they don't have time management skills or organization is difficult for them, ensuring that they're on time for a meeting itself is very stressful. I'm just giving you simple examples so that you can understand that these things are in fact impacting them in a negative way, and it's not just an act. Because a lot of people think, oh, this guy talks so well, he's so creative, look at him coming up with solutions. He can't make it to a meeting on time, but he can't, because it's difficult. He may need the help of 4 or 5 apps before he's able to do that, right? So look at the anxiety that they're dealing with just to be somewhere on time. If it is an autistic individual and you've asked him to come for coffee in a place that's very noisy because you want to discuss his next project, just imagine the anxiety level. I can't sit in this environment, I can't hear you because I can hear everything else as loud as I can hear you. So everyday actions, everyday routine things that are easy for neurotypicals are not easy for neurodivergents, and the not easy translates to a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. There are higher suicide rates, 3% more likely to commit suicide than neurotypical populations. Neurodivergents are 3% more likely to do that. Neurodivergents also actually have a slightly decreased lifespan because of all of the anxiety that they're living with and all of the difficulty that they're navigating to survive in this world. You talked about masking. Masking is exhausting, because if you are not like somebody else, they do not include you. You're excluded, you're isolated. Okay, you're never going to be part of the team. So what do? I mask. I'll just fake it. I'll act like I understand your jokes. I'll act like I understand sarcasm and I have no clue what I'm talking about. I'll also try and pick up on little nuances and mimic somebody else's body language, maybe, whatever it takes for me to survive. But at the end of the day, after doing this for so many hours, I come back and I might have a complete meltdown, or I might just burn out completely because I can't keep it up any longer. So look at the anxiety, and again, coming out of those kind of things. So you have, like I've given you examples of different kinds of anxiety, different kinds of situations that can build up different degrees and levels of anxiety and so on. And add to the fact that after this, when you're then going to the workplace, and then, so this is, we're talking about the last straw on the camel's back. Okay, after all of this, you go into the workplace and then you're bullied, persistently criticized, let's say, or there's gaslighting where someone makes you, doubt, did I just do that? Or makes you doubt the validity of your thoughts and actions. Or it could be subtle microaggressions, with, you know what, I think they're all a little bit autistic. It doesn't matter really, you can keep quiet about that. Why are you whining so much? Why are you complaining? It's like that. So all of these things together just add up, and before you know it, this person is going through PTSD level trauma and anxiety, and there's a lot of depression also among neurodivergents. Mental health is an issue that neurodivergents face to a larger degree. So, yes, you have to keep all of this in mind when we're talking about anxiety, because otherwise, anxiety just becomes a word. And the depth of what neurodivergents are going through every day in their life, and then again in the workplace, that just doesn't come across with one word.
Yeah. So I want to talk about work and specifically about finding work, recruitment, right?
Yeah.
So let's start with the first thing, first step about recruitment, which is job description. That's probably the first entry point, right? A career site and a job description, and that's where the process starts of selection, right? In a way. And I want to go through this process of recruitment step by step to just understand the barriers, to including neurodivergence. So let's just start with this first, like job description. That's the first step, right? Of the whole overall application process.
Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, go for it. I thought
No,
you
I
were
was
going
just asking, in job descriptions and the
Yes.
application process, what are these unconscious biases and the way it's the communication is that creates a barrier for neurodivergence?
Yes. So when we're talking about job descriptions and job advertisements, I'm just going to club them together
Yeah.
to make it easier. So when a company puts out job descriptions and job applications, what they have to understand is neurodivergents communicate differently from neurotypicals. I've already said that. So there is a process of bridging this gap. So for that, you need to just be conscious of using certain kinds of language, and also of, let's say, organizing your job description in a certain way. So I'll give you an example. The language used has to be simple, it has to be concise, it does not have to be flowery at all. In fact, it should not be flowery or um, in any way confusing. So simple and direct sentences, concise, stick to the point, don't put in unnecessary information. Whatever job descriptions are there, supposing you're talking about an online job description or advertisement, space it out, make it more readable by spacing it out, put in bullet points wherever you can. And keeping the language simple ensures that there is no misunderstanding or miscommunication. List out the skill sets that you absolutely want, throw out everything else. So we usually have these must have and the nice to have ones. So if the nice to have ones are just merely desirable, they don't change the equation, don't put it there. Just keep your essential skill list there. If you want to put the desirable skill list, clearly mark it as that, so that the neurodivergent individual who is coming in, looking at the description and wants to apply, is not scared away by seeing this long list of things that, probably he will not actually be able to tick all of those boxes, he or she. And what they will do in that case is that look back and think, oh, I only fit 7 out of these, that means I'm not qualified. So that's why you need to put a lot of thought into how these job descriptions and job advertisements are structured, what the language is like when you mention that, mention the qualifications, etc., that's needed. And also when you talk about skill sets and you want to say things like must be a fantastic team player or has to be an excellent communicator, things like that. Maybe for you and me, that doesn't sound too ambiguous, but for a neurodivergent, that's very, very ambiguous. What does excellent communicator mean? If I am a software tester, do I need to be an excellent communicator? Not necessarily, right? It's not a client facing role. And if you talk about being a great team player, instead of that, if you just say able to collaborate and work closely with a team that does XYZ, that solves your problem, because then the skill set is clearly defined, and it's also associated with the task that that person is expected to do. So you have clarity through and through, and a neurodivergent individual will be comfortable applying in that case. And there's also one thing that I think most companies need to keep in mind, that if a neurodivergent individual is looking at your job posting, he or she again needs to be convinced that this company has a culture that is inclusive. And for that, you have to mention your DEI affirmation statements over there, saying that we are open to reasonable accommodations. We are into diverse hiring. You have to make your statements over there very clearly, and you have to maybe mention it more than one place, so that as somebody is reading this, they see that this company has a culture that is inviting of neurodiversity. They want people to come in, and then you feel that a company with that culture can become a safe space for me, and that will encourage neurodivergence to apply. So you have all of these things that
Yeah.
you look in.
I think simple bullet points, unambiguous, will even
Yes,
work for
but
neurotypicals.
it works for everyone.
Because
and
yeah,
and
it
you
applies for everyone. So I mean, I was just contemplating, literally, are there two job descriptions, one for typicals and one for divergence? In a way that you answered, actually the answer is a big no. It looks like a big no, because a simple, concise, bulleted, I expect you to do a sales presentation in front of 10 people, is a very specific ask, as
Yes,
opposed to, a fantastic, presenter, for example, right? So
yes,
uh,
yes,
that could help everyone. Okay. So that's the step one. Then comes the interview
yes,
process, right? So I would like to talk a little bit about the interview process itself,
hmm,
and again, the what are these unconscious biases or stereotypes or ways, or the way we conduct these interviews. What do we need to unlearn to make it welcoming and inclusive?
you will have to unlearn a lot, Keshav. It's not like one thing,
I know,
but
but yeah, I do
yes,
I do want to get to some list of things that we
absolutely.
could
I'll
look at.
give you a few examples. Again, I'm just going to go by examples so that
Yeah.
anybody who's listening can then follow it up later on by reading up on it themselves. So if you talk about an interview, as I mentioned earlier, eye contact is a big thing. So let's say I'm an interviewer, or you are, who has no exposure to neurodiversity, neurodivergence, has not read about it, has may not directly, maybe, may not have been aware that he was directly interacting with a neurodivergent. Let me put it that way. So that's the interviewer, and you have a neurodivergent candidate. And the interviewer is going to go by his past experience, by his belief in what constitutes a good candidate, right? One would be maintaining eye contact, otherwise, they'll think you're shifty. Another thing would be like, your entire posture, your body language that's there, and the tone of voice that you use. Because there are many neurodivergents who may talk in a little bit of a robotic fashion, like there won't be nuances in their tone. So it may sound monotonous. Okay, so these are factors that may put off a regular interviewer, because what are they expecting? They're expecting a certain set of characteristics that they are used to. And they're also looking for people who are like them. That's a very human thing. I'm looking to hire somebody whom I resonate with. If I see more differences than similarities, I'm likely to reject this candidate. I'm not then looking at his capability. I am doing it out of bias. That's where you see one example of bias. Another one would be, now I'm looking through resumes. Let's say I'm trying to narrow down my search. I see resumes with, I see one, well, a resume in which the candidate is qualified, but the work history is very patchy. So I'm likely to not go with that because the work history is patchy, right? It's inconsistent. And in my mind, I've immediately made a judgment thinking, this person isn't reliable. Look at that. Look at the kind of work history that's coming out on the resume. But what they may be missing out on is a neurodivergent with exceptional skills in those areas where he's listed out, or he or she's listed out in the resume. And they may also have not taken into consideration the fact that if that person is neurodivergent, they may not have been supported in their previous workplaces. Maybe they didn't get the environment that they needed. Maybe they didn't get the accommodations that they needed within their environment. Maybe they're seeking to find a more inclusive company to work in, for instance. But see how quickly we narrow down searches by just picking off the ones that don't fit the bill exactly the way we've pictured in our mind. Again, that's bias, right? So these are a couple of examples of how interviewers generally sort of weed out the undesirables, and our neurodivergence could fit into that. Even if this would be an interesting example, like if a dyslexic candidate applied for the job, and dyslexics have difficulty with written language, so there will be spelling mistakes, there'll be words going here and there, but dyslexics all also have like really high creativity levels. They are very good big picture thinkers. They're also very good 3D thinkers, spatial thinkers, so there are skill sets that are fantastic, but on paper, again, they might get rejected because of these errors that may creep in, because this is not their strength. So unless an interviewer knows about all of this, knows about the potential strengths of neurodivergence, knows this, unless he knows that there's this whole variety of skill sets that also comes with certain challenges, he may never pick any of these resumes, any of these people. So here is again another kind of bias.
Yeah. Because we are talking about inclusive language, please don't mind. You can use the term they rather than him or her.
Yes, yes, sorry. Yeah, I'm trying. I
Sorry.
keep, yes,
It's about including everyone. So,
yes, yeah.
um, so the next step, let's say that you go through the interview process. You worked hard, and then you get selected, and then comes onboarding, right? And so now. Again, again, that's the same question, saying that what do we need to unlearn in our onboarding process to make people feel who join feel more inclusive. We are talking about neurodivergence specifically, to feel more included. And some of these things could be accommodations, which you said, but I would like to you to elaborate a little bit more, because I think that once we complete the loop of them actually joining a team and the team is inclusive is when the whole magic of higher productivity and everything happens. But it looks like every stage is a barrier. So I do want to talk about you to talk a little bit about this whole onboarding and sensitization around it.
So when we're talking about onboarding a neurodivergent individual into the team, the first thing that the manager or who is responsible needs to do is to have like a one-on-one session with the neurodivergent individual and asking them specifically, how would you like to be introduced to your new colleagues? Because we have standard ice breaking activities, group outings, whatever it is, in order to familiarize these two, a new hire with the existing employees. But for a neurodivergent, that can be very, very difficult, very, very anxiety ridden, very stressful to be part of an ice breaking activity. Because again, as I've said before, maybe group settings aren't the best way for them to get acclimatized to the workplace. So that's one part of it. Then when you talk about workplace accommodations, because you're hiring someone and you expect them to work in an environment, like I've said, that is not tailored for them. So before the hiring process starts, you need to do enablement. Most companies um, who are serious about neurodiversity follow that. They follow the enablement program, which has a whole, it starts with planning, it ends with training, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in the middle. So when you do the enablement process correctly, then all of the other things will fall into place. Now, for your onboarding, once you've done all of the ice breaking equivalent activities, again, like I said, preferably keep it to a one-to-one activity, and then you move on to asking them what kind of accommodations they may need. Ask. You can have a standardized accommodation form if you want. If you are a really inclusive company and you've built your culture to be really inclusive, everyone will feel comfortable enough asking for the accommodations they need. It can be anything. It can be keeping my desk away from direct sunlight. Let's say it's near a window and I'm uncomfortable. It could be a request for noise canceling headphones. It could be screen readers. It could be, even if I'm a high anxiety neurodivergent, then maybe I want a rear view mirror kind of a setup, on monitors. I've seen those, or computers, so that they know who's walking behind them, things like that. So all of these accommodations, they are simple, they are low cost, they're very effective, and they can change things around for the neurodivergence. And when they get the accommodations that they need, they're able to function at the higher level that they're capable of. So yes, that is for the onboarding activities.
Great. We do have a audience question. I think this is around the interview process. Sometimes when an accommodation is requested during the interview process, it can ignite bias. Anima, what are your thoughts on how best to request an accommodation during the interview process? Are there any best practices or anything that you could share?
So ideally, when you put out your job description and your job advertisement, right from there, like I said, you have to put out statements. This is in the case of a company that's serious about the neurodiversity initiative. They have to put out statements saying that any request for reasonable accommodations, or accommodations, just leaving the word reasonable out of it, will be considered, right? So when they put that statement out there, the candidate will feel confident enough to approach them for an accommodation. It's better if they have like an accommodations list, and say like, okay, here's a form perhaps that you could fill, so before you come in for the interview, to see what we can do to make your experience better. Because an interview is highly stressful for a neurodivergent candidate. If, for instance, the interviewer could just go up right to the, let's say this is a physical interview, if the interviewer could go up to the entrance of the facility at a fixed time and escort the candidate into the premises right up to where the interview is happening, that removes a lot of anxiety. For instance, I'm just giving small examples. So that would be an accommodation that the interviewer can propose, so that it puts them at ease. Or in your accommodations form that you've provided the candidate, they may list out saying that I don't want a face-to-face interview, can I have a virtual interview, or anything like that. Or it can be made a task-based interview. The candidate is given certain tasks and asked to do that. There may not be any verbal communication or a requirement to do a traditional interview. There are many ways in which the interview process itself can be modified to be more accommodative in nature in general. And once the candidate feels confident that the interview process is malleable, it's flexible enough that they want to accommodate me, they will feel safer in asking for more accommodations if necessary. So that's the
Okay.
way I would look at it.
Okay. Okay. Great. So you mentioned about if a company is serious about inclusion. I want to you to have you come across some companies who have done a better job? Let's just say that a better job in terms of inclusion. Any examples or that you would like to share that probably looks like, okay, that's a good way to go about it.
Yeah, so we know the neurodiversity initiatives, these are not, these haven't been around for that long in comparison to other diversity initiatives. Therefore, we have very few good examples. We know that most people are interested in this, and I would urge people to read up about these initiatives. Like IBM has a good neurodiversity initiative. The Ultranauts, a company called Ultranauts, is also, I think that there would be a textbook case of how to do or how to implement a neurodiversity initiative in the best possible way. And the reason for this, Keshavan, primarily is because these initiatives in these two companies are headed by neurodivergents, or they were initiated by neurodivergents. So it's like you're having, specific programs for women that are headed by men. That's what normally happens when all of the neurodivergent initiatives are headed by neurotypicals. So when you have a company that takes the initiative seriously enough, that the neurodivergents themselves come forward and say, okay, I will lead this initiative, then you have your best results. They develop processes that are, truly worthy of being followed uh, when the initiatives are driven in that fashion. So yes, those are the companies that I would give as examples. In Ultranauts, for instance, 75% of the workforce is neurodivergent. That's because they changed their hiring practice, they changed their recruitment process. And Marcel Ciampi, who is a neurodivergent herself, is responsible for architecting that particular, what can you say? They call it the universal workplace over there. So it's that particular element of universal design, inclusivity in the workplace. She was responsible for architecting that, and that's a case study on how neurodiversity initiatives should happen. In the Ultranauts, for instance, autistic individuals don't have a separate interview process. We're talking in this case, most of their 75% are autistics, by the way. So they don't have a separate interview process. They don't have a separate onboarding. Everyone is treated the same. So there is no loss of dignity anywhere in this process. By they're not even targeted or singled out by saying, okay, we'll do this for the neurotypicals, but for neurodivergence, let's do it this way. So if you make it a universal practice, the sense of belonging that comes as a result is huge. And then you've achieved your aim of being neuro-inclusive right there.
Great, great. So the last segment I would like to touch upon is technology, and how can technology help, whether it is about eliminating these biases or inclusive language or assistive or accommodations. I would like you to touch a little bit about what you have come across where technology has played a catalyst in promoting inclusion of neurodivergence.
Okay, so Keshavan, I'm sure that's more your area than mine when it comes to technology. But I can tell you from a neurodivergent perspective that technology is a friend of neurodivergence. Most of the neurodivergent individuals that I know, or forget whom I know, I mean, when you just check around, read about it, almost every neurodivergent individual is comfortable with technology. And that is the first sign that technology is a good way to foster inclusivity. So they're naturally inclined towards technology because they find that technology is dependable. All right, it doesn't give you surprises, and that it's a great way for them to learn and grow. So that's about neurodivergence and technology. You were asking about technology that assists. That's also there. A lot of neurodivergents use assistive technology in order to communicate. Many use technology, like I was mentioning, for executive functioning skill areas like time management, emotional self-regulation. For all of this, there are apps that people can use. But when you were talking about fostering inclusive language, I have not come across any other technology tool that actually does that. I do know that I believe the Ultranauts were on their, at least on, they have published that would be an ambiguity detection tool somewhere in the future coming up. So other than that, I have not actually heard of any inclusion tool the way you're talking about technology. You were mentioning where the technology fosters inclusivity. as a tool, I am not aware of, you know,
Yeah.
such tools.
That's what I mean. One of the things we are doing at iShield is to build the technology to help people write better job descriptions with inclusive language towards neurodivergence and, of course, other inclusion, other minority subgroups also. Also, workplace communications. Basically, we call ourselves like a spell check for bias.
Yeah.
Whether it is for inclusive communications internally as you communicate with each other, this could be job descriptions, as you rightly said, detecting, let's say, ambiguity in
Yeah.
the content. So we are building that technology. So we are doing our bit, at least in the communication space, to make it more bias free. Um, Okay, that's all what I had. So this was, as I said in the beginning, I'm learning. I'm new to this subject, but in this 1 hour, I really learned a lot and understood different facets of this subject. My biggest learning is I should find ways, right from design as an organization, to be more friendly and inclusive to people. So I'm going to talk to our team about how can we at least design an environment. Maybe that's the start. Recognize and design an environment that is inclusive. Thank you for sharing your insights, Anima. Thanks to all
Thank
the audiences. Thank you for your questions and comments. That was very encouraging. Yeah, have a good rest of the day. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.